They followed the checklist because that is what pilots are trained to trust above everything else, even their own instincts. In aviation, checklists are not suggestions. They are survival tools, built from decades of accidents, close calls, and lives lost. Each line exists because someone once didn't do it. On this flight, the crew was professional, experienced, and methodical. When the first warning appeared, it was subtle. No dramatic failure, no violent motion, no immediate danger felt in the cabin. The aircraft continued flying smoothly, almost deceptively normal. But the warning light carried authority. It demanded attention. The crew responded exactly as expected. Calm voices, standardized callouts, eyes locked on the procedure. Passengers remained unaware, trusting that the quiet competence up front meant everything was under control. What no one realized was that the checklist was built on an assumption already broken, that the aircraft sensors were accurately describing reality. From the instant the crew committed to that checklist, the flight entered a narrow corridor where every correct step pushed them closer to the edge, not because they were careless, but because they were precise. As the checklist unfolded, every step made sense. Power adjustments were made. Aircraft configuration was confirmed. Trim inputs were applied. Each action was spoken aloud, verified, and executed cleanly. The aircraft responded, but not as expected. Instead of stabilizing, it began demanding more attention. Control forces increased subtly, not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to register. The pilots noticed. They exchanged glances, rechecked the instruments, and continued. Aviation culture teaches crews not to chase sensations, but to trust data. Feelings can lie. Instruments don't, or so they are taught. But here, something was off. One instrument insisted the aircraft was approaching danger. Another quietly disagreed. The checklist did not acknowledge disagreement. It assumed clarity. It assumed truth. The crew pressed on, believing that finishing the procedure would resolve the inconsistency. Stress entered the cockpit not as fear, but as confusion. The most dangerous emotion in aviation is not panic. It is uncertainty paired with time pressure. And time was already slipping away. With each completed step, the aircraft became harder to control. Not violently. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like tightening a knot one pull at a time. The checklist guided the crew toward actions designed to protect the aircraft from a threat that did not actually exist. A single faulty sensor, small, cheap, and unnoticed, had convinced the system that the aircraft was in danger. And modern aircraft do not hesitate when they believe safety margins are being crossed. Automation intervened quietly at first, trimming, adjusting, correcting. When the pilots countered, the system responded, not aggressively, but confidently. It believed it was saving the airplane. The checklist, followed perfectly, confirmed that belief. The crew was no longer just flying the aircraft. They were negotiating with it, without realizing the terms had already been decided. Training teaches pilots to finish what they start. Abandoning a checklist halfway feels wrong, almost irresponsible. Under stress, humans seek completion. The crew cross-checked again, their workload increasing, their margin shrinking. Voices remained controlled, but breathing changed. Muscle tension built. The aircraft demanded constant input now. The automation pushed back harder. Every correction felt temporary. The cockpit filled with alerts, not screams, but persistent reminders that something was wrong. And yet, the airplane was still flying. That paradox delayed the realization that this was not a normal emergency. The warning was convincing. The response was logical. The outcome, however, was moving in the wrong direction. To recognize that required stepping back, questioning the premise, and accepting that the system itself might be wrong. But aviation does not reward doubt under pressure. It rewards adherence. By the time the checklist neared completion, the situation had transformed. The aircraft was no longer tolerant of small errors. Control forces were heavy. Energy margins were thin. The pilots were no longer preventing a problem. They were managing the consequences of earlier decisions that had felt unquestionably correct. Only now did a new thought begin to surface, faint and unsettling. What if the checklist was wrong for this situation? What if the aircraft was protecting itself from a danger that did not exist? But reversing course meant undoing actions that training framed as life-saving. It meant distrusting automation designed by engineers, certified by regulators, and proven across millions of flight hours. That kind of doubt does not come easily, especially when seconds matter. The crew fought to regain authority, but every input triggered resistance. The airplane was not broken. It was obedient to bad data. In the cabin, passengers sensed something was off, but not enough to panic. There was no screaming, no chaos. Just a subtle change in motion, a feeling that the flight was working harder than before. Up front, the cockpit was saturated. Alerts competed for attention. Hands worked constantly. Voices stayed professional, but urgency crept in. The aircraft had entered a regime where physics no longer forgave hesitation. The crew finally attempted to override the system completely, but now, time was against them. The window for easy recovery had closed quietly minutes earlier, without announcement. Every second now demanded perfect coordination, perfect understanding, and perfect timing. Aviation is unforgiving when those three do not align. When the aircraft was finally lost, there was no single catastrophic mistake to point to. No reckless action. No ignored warning. No dramatic breakdown of discipline. Investigators later reconstructed the flight second by second. The data showed a crew doing exactly what they were trained to do. Calm. Methodical. Professional. The checklist had been followed nearly word for word. The tragedy was not failure. It was obedience applied to a false assumption. The system had lied, not maliciously, but confidently. And the checklist had no defense against confidence without truth. In the aftermath, the aviation world was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Procedures are only as good as the assumptions behind them. Automation is only as safe as the data it receives. Discipline, when separated from understanding, can become dangerous. Changes were made, software rewritten, training expanded, checklists updated to allow doubt as a valid response. Crews were taught not just how to follow procedures, but when to step outside them. But those lessons came too late for the people on that flight. The haunting conclusion remains. Sometimes, the most dangerous situation in aviation is not when everything goes wrong at once, but when everything seems orderly, procedural, and correct. Because when humans stop questioning and systems stop listening, the checklist meant to save lives can quietly lead them toward disaster.